They say the most dangerous people are not the ones you meet in alleys, nor the shadows that lurk in empty streets, but the ones who share your roof, your walls, and your quietest hours. History remembers wars, disasters, and unspeakable crimes, but what history often forgets is the silent terror of a roommate you never truly knew. The thin sheet of plaster between your bed and theirs, the lock on your door that may or may not hold, the sound of footsteps in the hall at 3 a.m, those things are more intimate than most people care to admit. For in those sounds hides a truth that gnaws at the back of the human mind. How well do we really know the people who sleep just a few feet away from us? Every story begins the same. A simple classified ad, a college dorm assignment, a shared apartment meant to save money. It always feels harmless in the beginning. One person moves in, another agrees, and they divide the space, believing it is a temporary arrangement. But what happens when the person who has access to your toothbrush, your food, your bed while you are gone is not who they claim to be? What happens when the one person you thought was simply a housemate becomes the author of your deepest fear? The chilling truth is this. Countless unsolved crimes, unexplained vanishings, and whispered urban legends all began inside homes with more than one occupant. The walls never reveal what they hear at night, and no lease agreement can predict what will happen once two strangers begin to share the same air. That is where our story begins. 3 true accounts of roommates, each bound not by friendship or trust, but by silence, suspicion, and fear, each one unraveling into something far worse than anyone could have predicted. The first story is remembered in fragments, police records, witness accounts, and the remnants of one final night. A college student, far from home, discovered too late that the stranger who shared her room was keeping secrets buried under layers of normalcy. She noticed the odd glances, the way her roommate never seemed to sleep, and the quiet movements at hours when no one should have been awake. By the time she realized she was living with something far more sinister than an eccentric young woman, it was already too late. The second story took place in a small rented house, where 3 tenants shared the space to cut costs. One of them was always friendly, always helpful, always offering to cook or clean. But behind that mask was an obsession with control. Neighbors would later say they sometimes saw him staring from the upstairs window for hours, unmoving as though waiting for something. What happened inside that house remains an open wound for the town that remembers the screams no one was fast enough to answer. And then there is the third story, perhaps the most disturbing of all, not because of what was discovered, but because of what was never fully explained. A young man rented a room in an old building. The roommate seemed polite, quiet, unremarkable, but nights were filled with noises, tapping on the walls, shuffling footsteps, doors opening and closing though no one admitted to moving. Then came the final disappearance, a case never solved, leaving behind only a set of journals that described events so unsettling that even investigators refused to speak of them openly. Each story begins with something ordinary, an empty room, an ad, a handshake. But every one of them ends with something far darker, the certainty that sharing your home can be the greatest risk of all. These are not tales of strangers who attacked in the streets, nor of figures that crept from forests or broken down highways. These are stories of people who were invited inside. People who had keys. People who shared the fridge, the bathroom, the silence of long nights. The hook is not in the shock, but in the realization. Right now, as you listen, you might think of your own roommate, the one brushing their teeth in the next room, the one scrolling through their phone in the bed across from yours, the one asleep in the room down the hall. You might tell yourself you know them. But how much do you really know? Do you know what they do when you are not looking? Do you know why they chose you, this apartment, this exact room? Do you know what secrets they keep locked away? And what thoughts grow louder when the lights are off? Because if these 3 stories prove anything, it is that the horror is not in haunted houses or abandoned asylums. It is not in woods where no one dares to travel. The horror is in the walls we call safe, the homes we build, the beds we sleep in with the illusion of comfort. Horror is the moment you wake up at night and realize the sound you heard was not the house settling, but someone moving just outside your door. Horror is knowing that the stranger is not outside, it is already inside. So as these stories unfold, ask yourself, if the person you live with harbored darkness, would you even notice before it was too late? If the footsteps in the hallway were moving toward you, would you know it? If the last thing you ever heard was your own door creaking open, would anyone else believe what you already knew deep inside? That your roommate was never just your roommate. It began in a quiet town that prided itself on safety. The kind of place where doors were left unlocked during summer evenings and porch lights glowed, as if to reassure passers-by that the world was still gentle. For decades, the town's university had served as its lifeblood. Students arrived each fall carrying boxes of belongings, coffee-stained textbooks, and the hope of a future brighter than the small towns they had left behind. In those streets, beneath the canopy of autumn trees, youth walked side by side with trust. Parents let their children go because the brochures promised community and the illusion of safety. It was here, in this environment of routine and expectation, that one student stepped into the worst decision of her short life. She had grown up in a quiet household, a family of middle-class comforts and predictable arguments. The kind of family where dinner was always at 6, where good grades were rewarded, and where deviation from routine was quietly discouraged. When she arrived at the university, she carried with her not only a suitcase but a longing to belong, to make friends quickly, to avoid the loneliness that always stalks newcomers in unfamiliar places. It was that longing, innocent and human, that would be her undoing. Because when the university placed her in a shared dormitory, she did not complain. She accepted the assigned roommate, just another student like her, someone to talk to, someone to fill the silence. She had no reason to question the arrangement. The roommate appeared ordinary at first, polite, quiet, even friendly, the kind of person one barely noticed, which in itself felt comforting. She was thin, with pale skin that never seemed to warm no matter how bright the sun shone through the dorm window. Her hair fell in tangled strands, often unbrushed, as if mornings never belonged to her. She spoke softly, always in short sentences, and often avoided eye contact. None of these things seemed sinister in the beginning. They were quirks, harmless, the kind of details that make up the texture of a stranger's life. Who has not met someone who seems withdrawn, a little odd, but nothing more? That is how trust begins. Not with certainty, but with dismissal. With the thought, this is nothing, she is only shy. The other students on the hall had their opinions, though. They whispered in passing. They said the roommate rarely left the room. They said she had been seen wandering the corridors at night when everyone else was asleep. Her steps slow, measured, almost deliberate, as though she was listening for something. One student joked that she looked like a ghost. Another claimed to hear her humming to herself in the laundry room at 3 a.m. But students love their stories, and the line between rumor and truth blurs easily when young people are restless. The girl who shared her room laughed off the gossip. After all, it was only a dormitory, only a stranger assigned by chance. How dangerous could that be? It is important to understand the setting. The dormitory was an old building, constructed in the late 1960s with walls that held the faint smell of mildew and long corridors that amplified even the quietest sounds. The radiator hissed in the winter months. The doors creaked on their hinges. Students often spoke of feeling watched when they walked alone through the hall at night. But that was the architecture, they reasoned, the way sound carried, the way shadows lengthened. In this environment, the line between imagination and warning was blurred. And in that blurred space, one young woman slowly began to unravel. At first it was little things, the sense that her belongings had been moved. A shirt folded differently, a notebook left open when she was certain she had closed it. Then came the subtle feeling of being observed. She would look up from studying to find her roommate watching her, not speaking, just watching, as though studying something private that lay beneath the surface. It unsettled her, but she dismissed it. People stare sometimes. People are curious. She told herself it was nothing. But the more time passed, the more difficult it became to dismiss. Her roommate never seemed to sleep. Even at 2 or 3 in the morning, when she would stir awake and glance across the room, she would see her sitting upright on the bed, eyes fixed somewhere in the darkness. Once she whispered a question. "Are you all right?" But the only reply was silence, followed by the sound of slow breathing, controlled, deliberate. It felt less like sleep, more like waiting. No one ever prepares you for the intimacy of sharing a room with a stranger, the closeness of 2 beds pushed together in a single space, the way someone else's habits creep into your own life. In the daylight, things seemed ordinary. Classes, dining halls, campus chatter. But nights were different. Nights were when the fear began to take shape. She would wake to the sound of movement, soft as cloth dragging across the floor. Sometimes she would hear the drawer of her desk open, then close. When she confronted her roommate in the morning, the pale girl would shake her head and claim to know nothing. She smiled softly, her lips tight, her eyes steady, and insisted that no sound had been made. That denial was perhaps the most unsettling detail of all, because it forced her to question herself. Was she imagining it? Was exhaustion playing tricks on her? She told her parents nothing when she called home. She told her friends very little, because how could she explain it without sounding ridiculous? The girl had done nothing violent, nothing aggressive, nothing outwardly harmful. And yet something in the silence between them felt wrong, deeply wrong, like a seed of dread that had been planted and could not be pulled out. The roommate's presence began to feel less like company and more like surveillance. She was there, always there, watching, waiting, silent. And the young woman who once longed for belonging found herself longing for escape. But leases are binding, assignments are fixed, and trust, once given, is not easily taken back. What she did not know then, what no one could have told her, is that her instincts were not deceiving her. What was unfolding in that room would eventually become one of the town's darkest stories. And by the time anyone understood the truth, the silence had already claimed its price. The first sign that things were unraveling came not in the form of violence, nor even words, but in the quiet distortions of routine. It was a Thursday evening when she returned from the library and found her bedspread turned down neatly, as though someone had prepared it for sleep. It seemed harmless, even kind, until she remembered she had left it untouched that morning, the sheets in disarray from rushing to class. She asked her roommate about it. The pale girl only blinked, tilting her head as though she did not understand the question. "You must have forgotten," she whispered. And though her voice carried no accusation, there was something unsettling in the way her eyes lingered, something too certain. After that night, her sense of safety weakened. She began to notice subtle intrusions everywhere. Her notebooks would be filled with marks she had not written, short lines, strange symbols, doodles of figures with hollow eyes. Her drawers were rearranged, her clothing folded in unfamiliar patterns. The smell of her shampoo faintly different, as though someone had opened it, used it, then placed it carefully back. When she tried to speak of these things to friends, they laughed them off. "Maybe she is just helpful," one suggested. "Maybe she is borrowing," said another. But the laughter did not erase the cold that settled into her chest. Because it did not feel like kindness, and it did not feel like borrowing. It felt like invasion. The nights became the worst. She would fall asleep to the soft hum of the radiator, only to wake in the early hours and find her roommate sitting upright again, watching her with an expression that never changed. Sometimes the girl's lips moved, whispering something inaudible into the darkness. When asked, she claimed she was only dreaming, but the rhythm of her whispers suggested something more deliberate. The words were slow, deliberate, as if spoken to someone unseen. Once, in the fragile haze between waking and sleep, she thought she heard her name. Spoken softly, almost tenderly, but with a weight that froze her in place. She did not answer. She could not. By now she had begun to dread returning to the room at all. She lingered in the library until closing. She spent hours at the cafe on campus scribbling notes, forcing herself into the company of others. But eventually she always had to return. The door was always locked from within. The roommate was always waiting. Sometimes she found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the wall. Other times she found her lying perfectly still on the bed, eyes open as though she had been listening for her. She never explained. She never apologized. She only smiled faintly, a smile too calm, as if she knew something no one else did. It was during those long weeks that she began to notice the sounds. At first they were faint, scratching at the base of the bed, a tapping on the wall at odd hours. She assumed it was the pipes or the shifting of the building, but the noises grew clearer. Sometimes she heard footsteps pacing back and forth, though when she looked, her roommate was still. Sometimes the door handle rattled softly, as though someone was testing it. When she finally mustered the courage to ask, her roommate denied it, whispering that she must be imagining things. "The building is old," she said. "It makes noises." But her voice was steady, too steady, as though she had rehearsed the excuse. Sleep no longer came easily. When she closed her eyes, she felt watched. When she dreamed, she saw flashes. Her roommate standing above her bed, a pale face hovering in the dark, hands reaching for her belongings. She would wake with her heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat, and there the girl would be, seated silently, expressionless, as though the dream had never ended. Each morning she felt more hollow, more frayed, until the simple act of unlocking the dorm door felt like stepping into a trap. Her friends began to notice the change. They said she looked tired, thinner, distracted. She smiled weakly and told them it was just stress. But inside she was unraveling. She started keeping her valuables in her backpack at all times, carrying them even to the shower. She hid her phone beneath her pillow when she slept. She even bought a small lock for her journal, though she knew it would not matter, because she had begun to suspect that nothing in that room could stay private, not when she was being observed every hour of every day. The breaking point came one evening when she returned from class and found her roommate standing at the window, her hands pressed against the glass. The sky outside was gray, heavy with the first hint of winter. The girl turned slowly, her expression flat, and said in a voice that was almost a whisper, "I know how you sleep." She said nothing more. She returned to her bed and lay down, eyes fixed on the ceiling. No explanation followed. None was needed. The words themselves were enough. That night she could not close her eyes. She lay awake, staring at the faint light that seeped under the door from the hallway. Hours passed, but her roommate did not move. At least not at first. But near dawn she heard the sound, the slow creak of the bed springs across the room, followed by the shuffle of bare feet against the linoleum floor. She kept still, heart racing, breath shallow. The footsteps drew nearer, then paused. She could feel it, the presence standing above her, the weight of unseen eyes. And then slowly the footsteps retreated, the bed creaked again, and silence returned. She told no one the next day. Because how could she? To speak it aloud would make it real. Instead, she carried it inside her like a sickness, waiting for the moment when silence would break into something she could not control. The mystery was no longer whether something was wrong. It was how long she could endure before the truth revealed itself, and whether she would survive the revelation. The truth of what happened inside that dormitory was pieced together later, not from one confession nor from one report, but from fragments scattered like broken glass. What emerged was not a single clean narrative, but a series of unsettling details that pointed in different directions, none of them offering comfort, all of them suggesting that something unnatural had unfolded within those walls. One of the first fragments came from the girl herself, though her words were found only after everything had ended. Her journal, hidden beneath her mattress, contained entries that began in ordinary tones. Notes about classes, descriptions of the weather, thoughts about missing her family. But as the weeks passed, the handwriting changed. The letters grew tighter, more frantic. Lines pressed deep into the paper as though written under strain. She described nights without sleep, the sense of being watched, the whispers she could not decipher. Then the entries grew darker. She began recording times: 2:37 a.m., 4:14 a.m., 3:19 a.m., moments when she woke and saw her roommate standing over her. "She does not blink," one entry read. Another: "She is listening to something I cannot hear." The strangest entry was written in a trembling hand, as though the writer could barely control the pen. It read only, "She touched my wrist while I slept. I woke to her holding it. She did not let go for a long time." After that, the handwriting dissolved into scrawls, words half-formed, almost unreadable, as though fear had overwhelmed language itself. But the journal was not the only evidence. Other students in the dorm reported small details, each insignificant alone, but together forming a chilling picture. One girl said she often saw the pale roommate standing at the end of the hall, unmoving, staring down the corridor for long minutes at a time. Another claimed she once passed her in the stairwell, only to feel a wave of nausea as the girl looked directly at her. A boy on the floor below swore he woke one night to the sound of footsteps pacing above him, long, deliberate strides that continued for nearly an hour. When he looked outside, the lights of their room were on, but no voices could be heard. Then there were the objects. After the authorities eventually entered the room, they found a collection of small, unsettling items inside the roommate's desk drawer. A pair of scissors with the tips dulled, a bundle of hair tied with thread, scraps of paper covered with symbols that no one could easily explain. Some looked like letters, others like crude drawings, most of them repeating patterns of eyes, circles, and spirals. When asked, she offered no explanation. She only said she liked to draw. Experts would later examine these drawings. One psychologist suggested they were obsessive in nature, perhaps the product of compulsive behavior, a mind caught in repetition. Another dismissed them as meaningless doodles. But there was one investigator, older, less eager to explain, who admitted quietly that the drawings disturbed him more than the case itself. "It is not what they mean," he said. "It is how many of them there are. She must have spent hours, days, filling page after page with these eyes. Who has watched that much? Who watches like that?" The roommate herself gave little testimony. When questioned, she spoke in the same soft voice she always had, never raising her tone, never showing anger. She denied entering the girl's belongings, denied watching her sleep, denied touching her wrist. And yet, her words carried no weight, for her expression remained blank, her eyes steady as though she was not truly invested in convincing anyone of her innocence. She did not defend herself with urgency. She only spoke calmly as if none of it mattered. The contradictions deepened when the parents of the missing girl arrived. They described phone calls in the weeks before, calls that grew increasingly frantic. Their daughter had spoken of sleepless nights, of feeling unsafe, of wanting to change rooms. But when they encouraged her to speak to the university, she hesitated. She said she could not explain why, her mother recalled. She said it would sound crazy. The last call came 3 days before everything ended. Her voice was trembling, her words hurried. She said only, "I do not think she wants me to leave." Then the line went silent. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery was an audio file. One student had been testing a new recorder for a class project, leaving it running overnight to capture ambient noise. By chance, the device picked up the sounds from the hallway outside the dorm room. At 3 in the morning, the recording captured a sequence of noises. The door creaking open, soft footsteps, a pause, then a whisper too faint to make out. What followed was the sound of something dragging lightly across the floor, then silence. The student claimed he had never heard anything like it again. When played for investigators, some described the whisper as nonsensical. Others swore they heard a name being repeated. The recording was entered into evidence but never released publicly. All these pieces, journals, testimonies, drawings, audio, should have formed a coherent picture. Yet they did not. Instead, they clashed, leaving gaps that only deepened the unease. Was the pale roommate dangerous or simply peculiar? Were the drawings evidence of obsession or only meaningless scribbles? Was the missing girl paranoid or was her fear a warning ignored too long? Every clue seemed to contradict the next, as though the truth was being deliberately obscured, hidden behind layers of silence and denial. In the end, the evidence did not bring clarity. It only magnified the horror of the unknown, because nothing in those fragments explained the final question that haunted everyone who encountered the case. If danger had been living so close, how could no one have stopped it? The disappearance fractured the illusion of safety that had held the campus together for decades. For students, the dormitory was supposed to be an inconvenience at worst. Too small, too noisy, too crowded, but never something to fear. That illusion collapsed overnight. The morning the girl was reported missing, silence spread across the building like smoke. Doors stayed closed. Conversations whispered through cracks instead of spilling into the hall. The ordinary hum of campus life, the clatter of breakfast trays, the shuffle of backpacks, the laughter that usually leaked into the air, was replaced by something heavier: suspicion, dread, and the awareness that a bed now sat empty. Her friends were the first to feel the weight of guilt. They replayed every moment, every conversation. Why had they laughed when she confessed her unease? Why had they told her she was imagining it? One recalled the last time she saw her, sitting in the library, hands trembling as she scribbled notes, eyes darting off into the doorway. "I should have walked her back," she told investigators later, her voice breaking. But guilt offers no correction. It only lingers, gnawing at memory until ordinary moments become unbearable reminders of what might have been prevented. Her parents arrived on campus within a day, faces pale and voices thin with panic. They stood in the dorm room looking at their daughter's belongings still neatly folded, the bed she had not slept in, the desk covered in scattered papers. The mother touched the chair where her daughter had once sat, as though the wood itself might still hold warmth. But the warmth was gone. The silence of the room spoke louder than any comfort. The father demanded answers from officials, his voice shaking with anger. But the more he asked, the fewer words anyone seemed able to provide. The only thing worse than a body is the absence of one. Meanwhile, the roommate remained calm. Too calm. When others wept, she sat quietly. When investigators asked questions, she answered in the same soft tone, steady and unbroken. For some, this composure suggested innocence. Perhaps she was simply detached, overwhelmed, unable to grieve in a conventional way. For others, it was something darker, a mask of control, a satisfaction hidden just beneath the stillness. Students avoided her in the halls. She ate alone in the cafeteria. The space around her seemed to grow wider each day, as though others instinctively recoiled, unwilling to stand too close. Psychologists later noted that fear spreads like contagion. It does not need proof. It does not require facts. Once planted, it infects everything. And on that campus, it grew quickly. Students began locking their doors during the day, something no one had done before. Some left their dorms entirely, moving in with friends or commuting from nearby towns. Others stayed but could not sleep, lying awake at night with every creak of the building transformed into a threat. Rumors spiraled out of control. Claims that the missing girl had been taken in the night, that the roommate was dangerous, that the building itself was cursed. Fear does not care about truth. It only feeds itself. The emotional collapse extended beyond campus walls. The town, once proud of its small, safe university, felt its identity cracking. Parents who had trusted the school began to question whether their children were safe at all. Local businesses saw fewer students, fewer families. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, remembering the mother's face when she walked the streets asking if anyone had seen her daughter. The image haunted them. Some swore they saw her wandering in the rain weeks later, still searching, still asking strangers questions they could not answer. Those who lived in the dormitory during that semester carried the weight longest. One girl said she could never again share a room with another person. The memory of waking in the night and seeing her own roommate even years later filled her with unease, as though trust itself had been poisoned. A boy admitted that he began sleeping with a chair wedged against his door, even when he later lived alone. Another confessed that he developed a habit of checking his closet and under his bed every night. These were not superstitions. They were rituals born of fear, survival mechanisms for people who had learned that the familiar could not be trusted. For the family, the loss was more than absence. It was corrosion. The parents' marriage strained under the weight of unanswered questions. Every holiday became an echo chamber of grief, the empty chair at the table louder than any conversation. Birthdays passed without candles, without laughter. The mother once said in an interview years later that the worst part was not knowing what had happened in those final hours. If she suffered, I could not save her, she whispered. If she called for me, I did not hear her. That thought consumed her more than death itself. The roommate, meanwhile, remained untouched by grief. Her expression never changed, her voice never wavered. She attended classes, submitted assignments, and walked across campus with the same calm pace as before. But the calm only deepened the wound for others. They saw her in the dining hall, moving slowly, eating quietly, and the sight alone was enough to make some leave their trays behind and walk out. She became a reminder, not only of the girl who was gone, but of the possibility that evil can exist without remorse, without explanation, even without acknowledgement. In the end, what broke people was not the disappearance itself, but what it revealed about the fragility of safety. The campus had once been a place of laughter, of ambition, of trust. Afterward, it became a place where every glance felt suspicious, every silence felt heavy. The dormitory was no longer just a building. It was a tomb of unanswered questions, and for those who lived through it, trust was not something they ever fully recovered. The investigation unfolded like a puzzle, where half the pieces had been deliberately hidden. Authorities combed through the dormitory room, the hallways, the stairwells, and the surrounding campus, yet the trail was faint from the start. There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle, no body. The bed had been slept in the night before. Her books lay neatly on the desk, her coat still hanging on the hook, her shoes arranged by the door. It was as if she had been erased, lifted out of her own life without disturbing a single object in the room. The roommate was the natural starting point. She was questioned repeatedly, her life dissected by investigators desperate for clues, but she never faltered. Her voice never broke. She insisted she knew nothing, that she had slept through the night, that when she woke, her roommate was gone. Her calmness unsettled even the most seasoned officers. One of them admitted later in a private account that he felt he was speaking to someone who had rehearsed every detail long before the questions were asked. It was not indifference, he said. It was certainty, like she already knew how the story would end. Investigators turned to the evidence they did have. The journal spoke volumes, though skeptics cautioned against trusting it entirely. One camp of experts argued that the missing girl had suffered from paranoia, perhaps brought on by academic stress, isolation, or undiagnosed illness. They pointed to the frantic handwriting, the repeated times scribbled in the margins, the references to whispers and eyes. This is the writing of a deteriorating mind, one psychologist claimed. It reveals fear, but fear is not proof of danger. But others disagreed. They saw the entries as warnings ignored, breadcrumbs leading to a truth too terrible to face. The drawings discovered in the roommate's desk became the next point of obsession. Circles, spirals, endless pairs of staring eyes. Some investigators dismissed them as meaningless, the idle scrawls of a lonely girl, yet others insisted they reflected obsession, even ritual. One criminologist suggested they resembled sigils, crude imitations of symbols found in occult texts. The roommate denied any such intent, but her denial did not erase the unease. If these are only doodles, the criminologist asked, why are they always the same? Why are there hundreds of them? Then came the recording, the faint audio of footsteps, whispers, dragging. Specialists enhanced the file, isolating the low murmur. Some claimed to hear a name repeated. Others said the words were gibberish, nothing more than the hum of old pipes distorted by the recorder. But the officers who listened in the silence of the evidence room never forgot the sound. One swore he heard breathing, slow and measured, just before the tape went silent. Another admitted privately that he stopped sleeping easily after hearing it. The file was never released, sealed instead among the growing pile of unanswered questions. Theories multiplied. Some believed the roommate was guilty, that she had done something in the night and concealed it so thoroughly that no trace could be found. They pointed to her composure, her silence, her refusal to show emotion. But others countered that if she had been guilty, there would have been something, anything left behind. Blood, fibers, prints, a misstep in her story. There was none of that. And so the question persisted. Could she have done something without leaving a mark? Or was the horror not in her hands at all? Another theory placed the blame on the missing girl herself. Perhaps she had fled, overcome by fear, slipping away into the night to escape the roommate she had grown to distrust. Some suggested she had run from more than just the dormitory, perhaps from pressures at home or from something she had never spoken aloud. Yet if she had fled, why leave behind everything? Her identification, her money, her coat. It was winter. No one runs into the cold with nothing. A third theory ventured into darker territory. Some students whispered that the building itself was cursed. They told stories of strange noises, of shadows at the end of the hall, of a girl who had vanished from the same floor decades earlier. The archives offered little to confirm such tales, yet the rumors spread, taking root in the fertile ground of fear. Paranormal investigators, drawn by curiosity, spoke of thin spaces, places where the boundary between presence and absence grows fragile. They suggested the roommate had not taken her. Something else had, something that did not leave traces because traces belonged to the living. Even among officials, there was no consensus. Files remained open, case notes unresolved. One detective kept a personal folder on the case long after retirement. In the margins of his notes, scribbled in uneven handwriting, he left a single line. She said she knew how the girl slept. That detail haunts me more than all the rest. The theories remain, but none of them satisfy. If the roommate was guilty, how did she erase every trace? If the girl fled, why did she never resurface, never send a word, never claim her belongings? And if it was something else, something the human mind cannot name, then what was it that moved in the silence of that room? The investigation in the end produced only one certainty. No one felt safe anymore. Official reports closed quietly, but the story did not fade. It lingered in whispers and half-remembered warnings, in the nervous glances of students who moved into new dormitories in the years that followed. Some locked their doors twice. Others left lights burning through the night. The absence of answers became its own kind of presence, heavy and inescapable. What remains is not justice nor truth, but an unease that refuses to die. A reminder that sometimes investigations do not solve mysteries. Sometimes they only illuminate how little we understand about the people closest to us, and how fragile the idea of safety truly is. Time passed, but silence never left that building. Students graduated, new ones arrived. The seasons shifted. Yet the memory of the vanished girl clung to the air like dust that could not be cleaned away. The dormitory still stood, its windows glowing faintly at night, its halls filled with the ordinary chaos of youth. But beneath the surface there was always something else. A current of unease, unspoken but deeply felt. When new students were assigned to the same room, whispers followed them. Some laughed off the warnings, others grew pale at the thought. But all of them sooner or later admitted they felt it. That heaviness, that sense of being watched, that feeling that someone else was still there, just out of sight. The official story ended with unanswered questions. No arrests, no confessions, no body. The file remained open, but years turned the ink faint and the memory brittle. Investigators moved on. Administrators stopped addressing it. Professors who remembered her spoke less and less of it, as though silence itself could smother the wound. But the wound was not theirs to close. It belonged to the parents who never saw their daughter again, to the friends who never forgave themselves, and to the students who carried the weight of the fear into their own lives. And yet, the one who remained, the roommate, carried on. She stayed enrolled, quiet and composed, attending lectures, walking across campus as if nothing had changed. No matter where she went, eyes followed her, filled with suspicion or outright dread. She did not falter under their gaze. She lived as if untouched by the storm that swirled around her, and perhaps that was the most disturbing part. Not her denial, not her silence, but her survival. She had been at the center of the mystery, and yet she endured, steady and unmoved, like stone in the middle of a river. To some she was proof of innocence. To others, she was proof of something darker, a predator who had hidden in plain sight and had never been caught. Years later, when students gathered to share old stories, her name still slipped into conversation like an unwelcome shadow. They spoke of the drawings, the whispers, the journal entries. They argued about whether she had been guilty, whether the missing girl had been paranoid, whether the truth had been something neither of them could explain. But the arguments never ended in resolution. They always ended in silence, a silence that settled heavily, because no matter what theory they leaned toward, the outcome was the same. A girl had gone to sleep in her bed and had never been seen again. What lingers is not just fear, but recognition. The recognition that what happened in that dorm room is not rare, that countless others live with strangers under their roof, sharing kitchens, bathrooms, and hallways without ever truly knowing who they are. People call them roommates, housemates, tenants, but those words are fragile disguises for what they truly are. Strangers given keys to our lives. And history shows that strangers, no matter how polite, no matter how quiet, can harbor secrets deeper than any lock can contain. There are other stories, whispered late at night in dormitories across the country, each echoing this one. The roommate who watched too closely, the housemate who disappeared after one terrifying incident, leaving behind a locked door and a room that no one wanted to enter again. The tenant who seemed friendly until the day the police carried boxes of evidence out of his closet. Most of these stories never reach headlines. They dissolve into rumor, into warnings passed down like folklore. Check the locks, trust your instincts, do not dismiss the feeling of being watched. But warnings come too late for those who ignore them. They come too late for the girl who wrote in her journal that someone touched her wrist while she slept. They come too late for the friend who laughed off her fears instead of walking her home. And they come too late for her parents who replay the sound of her last phone call in their heads every night, wondering if their voices could have saved her. The question that remains is the one no one dares to answer. What really happened in that room? Was it the cruelty of a predator masked as a roommate, hidden in silence and ritual? Was it the unraveling of a young mind, undone by stress until she ran from everything she knew? Or was it something beyond explanation, something that moved in the thin space between presence and absence, leaving behind nothing but echoes? The truth may never be known, and perhaps that is the final cruelty, that the mystery itself is the wound, open and festering with no closure in sight. Because absence is not empty, it is a presence of its own. It lingers in the corners of rooms, in the creak of a bed, in the whisper of footsteps where no one should be. It lives in the silence between breaths when you wake at night and wonder if someone is standing above you. So when you return to your own home tonight, when you cross the hall, when you hear the faint shift of floorboards, consider this: who truly sleeps under your roof? How much do you really know about the one who shares your walls? Do you trust the silence when they close their door? Do you trust the stillness when the lights go out? Or is the silence only waiting, watching the way it always has, the way it always will? Because in the end, the horror is not only in what happened to her. The horror is that it could happen to anyone. To you. To the person listening now. And if it does, no one will hear it until the silence is all that remains.